Hello and welcome to National Park Wild. I'm Eric, and I just came back from Isle Royale National Park. Today I'm going to give a full review. I went to both Windigo and Rock Harbor. I'll talk about what I liked, what I didn't like, whether you should go, and a couple really important tips for planning a trip here. There's a lot to talk about, so let's get right into it. Let's start with what I did overall, because most people do one of two things. A, day trip to one of the two areas, or B, do a backpacking trip from one area to the other and back, or just to one area to the other, and then take a plane or boat back. You can go by seaplane or boat to these places. I took seaplane all of the times that I was going, and the weird thing, my plan was actually leave by seaplane from Grand Marais, Michigan to Windigo, fly from Windigo to Rock Harbor the next day, and then Rock Harbor back the day after. So I didn't have a ton of time in the park overall. This was very interesting, as not a lot of people do this. The pilot even told us how few people do it. He said no one ever done it before that he knew of. But yeah, it ended up being a pretty fun trip, so I did like this plan. And I think it's a pretty good one if you want to have one rental car or a car in the same place. So let's get into Windigo first. That is where we went to by seaplane first, and it is a bit more developed than I expected. Given that Isle Royale is one of the least visited national parks in the entire country, I definitely expected there to be very few facilities, few people, all that. Though there actually was a decent amount of people. The Windigo sign is pretty cool. There's a bunch of moose antlers around it. And we stayed in some cabins that were in the Windigo area. They were very nice. There was a pit toilet outside. There was a spigot for water. There's a lot going on. It was a very nice rustic cabin. I enjoyed staying there. So I do recommend if you stay in Windigo and don't do backpacking, I think you should stay there. That's a good place. So Windigo, it's not quite as rocky as Rock Harbor, as the name kind of suggests, honestly. But it's very nice. It's very forested. There's some nice trails. I'll get into those now. Windigo Nature Trail's the first we did, one of the most popular. A fine trail with some nice trees and some flowers. I saw a squirrel. It was a good trail. There are plenty of loons along the water as you're going to this, and there's also some ducks. Like, when you're in the area, you're almost guaranteed to see some birds. We saw a bald eagle even at one point in Windigo. The next hike we did was Grace Creek Overlook. This one is fun. Do keep in mind that this one can get pretty grown in, I should say. There's a lot of plants that grow into the trail. Lots of roots and rocks, so make sure you're watching your step when you hike. The view at the end is very nice. I definitely enjoyed this trail. It goes even further to Feltman Lake if you want and have time. That's also pretty good from what I hear. The final trail we did was Menong Ridge. This one was fairly scenic, not the most scenic thing. And I should mention overall, Windigo is a pretty but not spectacular area in scenery. However, while it is mostly just forest and scenery and doesn't blow me away, what it lacks there, it makes up for in wildlife, because we saw a bull moose on the trail. We actually didn't find it until we were somewhat close, so we ended up backing up slowly, so it was a bit of a scary experience, but it was really awesome to see a bull moose. I really loved that. That was an absolute highlight of Windigo. And the whole trail was pretty good. We saw a few more moose after that. And seeing moose in Isle Royale, I should point out, it's not quite like Yellowstone where you're definitely guaranteed to see the large mammals. Even though there are a lot of moose on the island and many people do see them, keep in mind you're not guaranteed to see them. So it does take some looking, honestly, because the only time we saw moose was on a very quiet trail pretty late in the evening. That's when we were able to see them. So keep that in mind if you're looking for moose in Isle Royale. That is what we did in Windigo. We saw some snowshoe hares in the area as well. The visitor center is very nice in Windigo. That's where I got Junior Ranger badge. It was a very, very nice area. I definitely liked Windigo a lot. Now let's move on to Rock Harbor. Rock Harbor was very nice as well. As far as scenery goes, I prefer Rock Harbor, and I think if you can only go to one area, that is the one you should do. Rock Harbor is much more developed than Windigo. You have a lodge, you have this full-service restaurant. You have a lot going on, honestly. Visitor center is a bit smaller, surprisingly, but other than that, it is a somewhat developed area. We stayed in these housekeeping cabins, because they get housekeeping, and it was very nice. We got an awesome view of where the seaplanes and boats arrived near the dock. That was really, really cool. So the first main thing we did in the Rock Harbor area was the Stoll Trail to Scoville Point. This was my favorite hike in the park. It kind of is like, I'm not quite sure how to compare, but you're going along the rocky shore and you end up at the edge of the island and you're on a rocky bit of a plateau, I'll call it, but it's like really high up above the water and you're on the rocks and there's some trees all around. It's very nice. It's kind of like Point Reyes National Seashore. It's a very nice trail. I definitely recommend it. Very fun. It's just a really good hike. There's a bald eagle nest at one point near the end. I saw 2 eagles there, and then there's the babies that I didn't actually get to see, but they were there. And it's a very pretty trail. Definitely my favorite thing I did in Isle Royale. The moose sighting would be my second favorite whole experience, but I liked the hike a lot. The other day hike we did was Susie's Cave. Susie's Cave is very nice. It has a pretty cool... It's a cave at the end, though it's technically an arch that used to be underwater. It has a bit of an interesting history behind it, actually. I definitely recommend you do this one as well. It goes along the water for the most part. It's very, very nice. Both trails in Rock Harbor are good. Stoll Trail, if you can only do one thing at all in the park, is absolutely the thing I think you should do. And the next day, we had quite a bit of time. We took a water taxi out to Lookout Louise and hiked up there. Very nice views of that. You also get to see Hidden Lake and Monument Rock. Really, really good. It's a good trail overall. So, a few tips about Rock Harbor. First of all, if you're going to take the ferry, keep in mind you can leave from a couple places. If you're going to take the seaplane, I think you can only leave from Grand Marais. I could be wrong, but I believe you have to leave from there. And it's about an hour, I'd say. An hour flight, and it's very scenic when you go over the island. I really enjoyed flying over. So that's a couple of the tips. Keep in mind there can be a lot of bugs. We actually had a pretty bit of dry weather, so there weren't a lot of bugs compared to what we heard. But make sure you bring bug spray or you buy it from the park. But you'll definitely need that. Even though they weren't terrible when we went, they probably could be if you go. It's a very, very good park overall. So some final thoughts. With the exception of Stoll Trail, I don't think the scenery is breathtaking at Isle Royale. It may be for some, but I think the park mostly gets its praise for having really awesome backpacking and long hikes. I'm not the most experienced hiker, so I mostly just did the day hikes and stayed in more convenient areas, but I still like the park a lot. The hiking is good. The wildlife's really nice, especially if you see a moose or if you see wolves on the island, which we did not. Stoll Trail is the most breathtaking thing and a very, very nice trail. The crowds are not quite as small in the summer as you would expect, unless you go to certain backpacking areas, but they are still pretty small. So overall, wildlife is good, the scenery is decent, the hikes are really good, and it's a very nice park overall. It's not one of the greats, but definitely worth a visit. If you're an experienced hiker, I definitely suggest you do a backpacking trip. Otherwise, I honestly think a day trip doesn't really give you enough time to see the park, and you should kind of do what I did. You should go to both Isle Royale parts, Windigo and Rock Harbor. And those are all of my thoughts. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. Soon, I'll be going to Alaska, and I'll be reviewing the parks there. Some will be revisits, some will be new. I'll see you next time. Hello, and